Welcome back to our study of Ecclesiastes. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've appreciated the greatness of this book. It is just something that I have enjoyed studying through the years, and always learning new things, always learning things that really have helped me in my life. And I think probably uh, the some of the greatest lessons that I've learned is um, just to have that optimistic attitude, just to not let things get me down and discourage me, and basically pull a cloud over today's sunshine, but just live life optimistically, and trust in God, knowing that God has control over everything. And so, as the old saying goes, just let go and let God. And easier said than done, right? But still, we can do that. We should do that. We must do that to really live our lives of faith, and not let worry be something that really destroys the beauty of today and the good that exists today. Some of that we're going to be talking about today. As we have said numerous times, and it certainly is a fitting reminder, is this is a sermon. And as a sermon, uh, Solomon, as he is preaching this sermon, is drawn upon the wisdom that God has given him. And he is trying to answer really the most fundamental, important question about your life and my life and everybody's lives. And that is, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of our lives? And so many people, their lives are defined by maybe what they built, maybe some of the deeds they've done, whether good or evil. Um, but that shouldn't be really the legacy of our lives. But what should be the descriptive of our life is that we fear God and we keep his commandments. And so Solomon is answering the question that everybody should ask. Not everybody does ask, but everybody should ask about the meaning of life, the meaning of my life, and the direction that my life should go. You have control over your life. Nobody else does. I have control over mine. And so the choices that I make are those that are totally mine, whether good or evil. And so I don't have anybody else to blame but myself. No one is responsible for my happiness. No one is the cause of my sorrow or depression. Now, there may be external events that I let impact my thinking, my attitude, but yet I let them do that. And so Solomon is reminding us that uh, we can choose to enjoy work, enjoy the people that we have in our lives, enjoy the things that we have, the material possessions, whether many or few, and just live life day to day, live life optimistically. Now, if we couldn't do that, we wouldn't be asked to do that. But we are. And so that's the challenge that we have before us, especially in times where there seems to be so much negativity and, um, kind of Debbie Downer type attitudes. And if your name's Debbie, I apologize. apologize about that. Maybe I should have said negative Nancy, but there may be some Nancys in this class too. So anyway, I better stop while I'm ahead, right? So it's the last two chapters are so full of admonitions that I believe that this really is Solomon's conclusion to the sermon. We might call it Solomon's invitation to now start wrapping things up, giving us really some bullet points on what we have covered so far. And then he is going to wrap it up with the two biggest concluding points at all there in chapter 12. If we were to just summarize chapter 11, I like to call it Keys to Successful Living. If you want to get the most out of your life, and if I want to get the most out of mine, then here are the keys, Solomon says, to accomplishing a successful life. First, he's going to talk about the idea of sharing. You know, the Scrooge mentality doesn't work. It doesn't provide happiness. Although those who are Scrooges tend to think that by giving things away will mar their happiness. But Jesus taught that it's more blessed to give than to receive. So, lesson number one, as he is wrapping up this sermon, is share. Be willing to share. Have an attitude of sharing. You know, I'm reminded of what Paul tells the rich in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 17 through 19, especially in verse 18. He tells them that they need to do good, to be rich in good works, and then here, ready to share. That's the word koinonia in Greek. And so to participate with others, to share what you have with others, rather than be covetous and Scrooge-like, to share. And then we need to live our lives in trust. And boy, haven't we said that a few times as we have studied the book of Ecclesiastes. But we do need to have that kind of reliance upon God, because Solomon is going to remind us of really two fundamental points. One is that there is so much that is unknown. And second, there is so much that is beyond our control. And so since we don't know, and since we can't control, what is our alternative? To fret and to worry? Well, that seems to be the track most people choose to go down. But instead, we just need trust in God. And then third, he's going to bring us back to the idea of work. He has said so much in this book about work, having a good attitude with work, having gratitude that we can work, a positive attitude within whatever job it is that we have. And so we need to work, because if we don't, then we're living in defiance of God. We're in defiance of God's word. Even in creation, God worked for 6 days. He rested on the seventh day when he gave the 10 commandments to the Israelites at Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 20. His admonition to them was to work 6 days, and then on the Sabbath have a day of rest. And in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, Paul says, if a man won't work, neither let him eat. So it is God's plan that we work. And then the fourth admonition he's going to give in this chapter, as we're concluding the sermon, is the idea of being optimistic. Despite negatives, we can still and should still have an optimistic outlook. And then he's going to talk about just choosing to be happy. And Solomon separates the idea of optimism from joy. And I think we should too, that typically those two ideas are linked together, and that's okay. But Solomon is encouraging us to choose to be happy. And even though, optimism is a different thing, we need to have both. And then he's going to conclude this chapter with the sixth admonition, and that is to enjoy life. Take time to enjoy what there is to enjoy. He is especially going to direct his words at young men, but there is a wider application that we can make in those verses, and we'll certainly do that, especially those of us that might be just a little shade past the um, young person category. So still the idea of enjoying life. All right, so let's go through this. The first key to successful living is to share. He says, cast your bread on the surface of the waters, for you will find it after many days. This has been admittedly one of those Bible phrases that has been a real head scratcher. And people have approached it with all sorts of views, all sorts of interpretations. It is a phrase that has intrigued scholars for centuries. And the one thing that I think all Bible students and scholars can agree on is this was an ancient expression whose exact meaning is lost to us today. We're left with some interpretations. We're left with some guesswork. But I always say that the best way to interpret any passage, especially those that seem to be difficult, is to look at context. And the context of verses 1 and 2 have to do with the idea of sharing. All right, so let's take this cast your bread upon the waters and examine it, and then circle back around and consider it in the overall context of sharing. One interpretation is that this is a prophecy to accept Jesus, who is the bread of life. Well, this is a fanciful view. It's an out there view that has very, very little support from Bible students and scholars. While no one questions that the Old Testament is full of prophetic text regarding Jesus, this is would be such a veiled, almost apocryphal approach to Jesus that it's just a stretch. And so I categorically reject that view. A second view is that it's an admonition to engage in maritime trade. You cast your bread upon the waters. Some scholars say was an old adage saying, in order to make money, you got to get in the boat. You got to get on the water. And so get out there, get to work, and reap the benefits that are found with maritime trade, maybe fishing, things that are can be profitable from that which is found in the water, like a fish. Well, Solomon had a fleet. He had considerable wealth, according to 1 Kings chapter 10 and verse 22. But it's highly unlikely that Solomon is out of nowhere saying, by the way, I think your best bet is to get involved in maritime trade. It's like, where did that come from? That is out of nowhere. And so it just doesn't fit with the book. It doesn't fit with the immediate context. So out that interpretation goes. Interpretation number 3 is a more general statement, just to engage in business as a whole. That the idea is, in order to be successful in life, you've got to take risks. Casting your bread on the waters, why would you do that? Perfectly good bread. You're throwing perfectly good bread on the waters. Well, that's just dumb. Well, sometimes when you engage in business, there are risks, there are failures. There's always the possibility of failure, and but it also has the potential for success, maybe great success and great profit. And so there are some scholars that see this as Solomon not encouraging maritime trade, but the idea of an expression that simply means, sometimes you got to put yourself out there and you got to do things that on the surface seems as wasteful as casting bread on the water. But ultimately, it will come around and will reap some benefits. A fourth interpretation, which I believe is getting closer to where Solomon is going with this, is an appeal to philanthropy. Loving people, loving men, doing good things. And sometimes doing something for someone else may not reap any rewards at all. Or if it does reap any rewards, they may be delayed and really come back and provide some benefit weeks, months, maybe even years down the road. So you cast the bread on the waters. Well, you're doing something good for someone else, and then it will return after many days. Is that, well, there will be some benefits that will come back to you in the long run. The fifth one, though, which is similar but not completely to that interpretation, is that this is an illustration to live by faith. And so I'm kind of blending this point with the fourth point. We have to take risks in order to reap rewards. We have to do things that on the surface might not make any sense, especially to those people that are observing the way that you're living your life, that it just seems like a foolish thing to do. I remember when I was growing up and I had one of my friends that went to church with me who was not a Christian. And when the collection plate came by, he saw me put a $20 bill in the plate, which back in those days was a lot of money. And he goes, "Why are you doing that? What a waste." Well, from a worldly perspective, giving money to the church would seem like a waste that has no return for you, no obvious benefit to you. And so why do it? It's like casting bread on the waters. It was just, why would you do that? That's just a foolish action. But ultimately, the life lived with faith is one that puts itself out there, does some things from the human perspective, may not seem wise at all. Even going to church, for example, to people of the world might seem like a foolish venture. Why would you give up a perfectly beautiful Sunday morning to go to church when you could be out on the lake, or you could be hiking or camping or doing something like that? But Solomon is, in this last section, in his invitation to his sermon, is giving us a call to action. And there's an encouragement here to go ahead and put yourself out there, take some risks, do some things that on the surface may not seem all that logical, especially to the non-spiritual. We do have to trust that our actions will reap consequences down the road. So on the surface, when we give ourselves to others, maybe we invest in them, maybe we give them some money, maybe we spend some time with someone that other people have considered as hopeless, a hopeless cause. It, in their eyes, is viewed as casting bread upon the waters. But Solomon finishes the ancient proverb by saying that it will return to you after many days, or you will find it after many days. And so the idea seems to be that you gave it with really no expectation that it was going to come back. But it does come back. And so you might say, well, why would you want the bread after it's all soaked and all that? That's not really the purpose of the proverb, is that the bread that you find is actually going to be usable. But the idea that it did come back around. And so initially it looked like it was a completely futile venture, a waste of perfectly good bread, when in fact there ends up being some benefit to you down the road. So lesson number one, as Solomon is wrapping up this sermon, is the idea of being willing to share. So yes, there is a level of philanthropy in the idea that he's teaching us here. Now, the interpretation of verse 2 is going to depend on how we interpreted verse 1. Divide your portion to 7 or even to 8, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth. All right, so if we're right in our interpretation of verse 1, and I most certainly think we are, then Solomon is extending the idea of sharing to share with as many as you possibly can share with. Find 7 people, find 8 even, that that you can share with. Again, for the Bible critic or for the materialistic person among us, would say, why would you do that? Why would Scrooge end up taking what it is that he has worked so hard to accumulate and give it to 7 people, share it with 7 people, 8 people that are not going to be able to give you any kind of return? They may not be able to pay back. They may not appreciate what it is that you give them. And then third, you might end up needing that money, which actually is where Solomon is going in this verse. So you're better off just, getting that vice grip on your money, put it in the bank, store it, put it in a safe place, and save it for that proverbial rainy day. So it's your portion. He says, divide your portion. So it's yours. You have control over it. You can determine what it is that you're going to do with that money. But Solomon's suggestion is to split it up, divide it up. And he's not talking about, a numerical exactness with 7 or 8. But the overall idea of be generous with as many people as you possibly can be generous with. And then he goes on to say, for, and there's that important word both in Hebrew and in Greek, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth. All right. He doesn't complete the thought, because I believe that we should be able to connect those dots on our own. And that is, what goes around comes around, as we might say. And so if benevolence was what went from you, then benevolence from others will be what comes back to you. If being miserly and a Scrooge is, and you shut people off and you don't share with them, that's what went from you, well, that's what you're going to get in return. Because misfortune is his word. Some versions talk about evil, but once again, we're talking about just misfortune is a great translation, ends up being what happens to you. And now you were helping others in their day of darkness. You had your portion, and things weren't going all that well for them. So you helped them out in their low point. Well, now there's been a role reversal, and you're in the low point, and presumably they're back on top. And maybe the reason they're back on top is because you helped them get there. So now that you're the one that's in need, they're going to remember your benevolence. They're going to remember that you are the one that helped them, and now they're going to help you. So initially, it seemed like you're casting bread on the waters. You're helping people that, maybe someone would say they're a bunch of losers. They're a bunch of lowlifes. They're not ever going to make anything out of their lives. And so you're throwing money after bad. You're wasting your time. But the principle of a person living life with God is God gave these things to me, not for me to hold on and to hoard those things, but to turn right around and be generous and sharing with others, even if it seems like sharing that with others seems like it is a foolish casting your bread on the waters type of activity. So kindness given can end up being kindness returned. And that's a wise way to live your life. Now, let's suppose, though, that the people that you helped didn't come back around and help you when you were in your moment of need. That's totally on them. They're going to have to answer to God for that. That still didn't make your kindness in the beginning a wrong move. It's still the right move to be generous, to be ready to share, to help others, and then let God provide the reward if those people are not going to return and say thanks. So anyway, so verses 1 and 2, key to successful living is we need to share. And it's almost as if Solomon is suggesting that misfortune, there's a good potential. He says may occur. He doesn't say will occur, but it might or may occur. But if it does, you have put yourself in a good position to have some people, maybe a number of people that can help bail you out. And who's going to regret that? Who's going to, now that you're in the low point of your life and you've got 7 or 8 people that are ready to help you, you're certainly going to say, man, am I glad that I helped you when you were down and out, because now I'm down and out and you're helping me. So just a wise way, a good way to live one's life. Okay. Key number 2 to successful living is the idea of trusting in God. There are some events that are inevitable and unexplainable and uncontrollable. Well, there are a lot of uns in that, but how true that is, right? Where there's just, life is full of twists and turns and has its mysteries. And no matter how much we might try to intervene or we might try to stem the tide, it's not going to happen. We can't do it. Others can't do it. And Solomon is going to offer 2 examples here that has to do with trust. First, clouds. If the clouds are full, they pour out rain upon the earth. All right, so you're not going to be able to control the clouds. If they're full, they're going to rain. And there's nothing you can do that's going to stop that from happening. All right, so it is inevitable and it is uncontrollable. So man is powerless to stop the rain. Okay, admit that you have a weakness. Admit that there's something that is beyond your ability to control. Okay, the wise person says, "I'm good with that. I can live with that. I don't have to be in charge of everything." His second example then is regarding a tree. Whether a tree falls toward the south or toward the north, wherever the tree falls, there it lies. So, in God's vast creation, with forests that cover the planet, uninhabited areas, there are always reasons why trees fall. Maybe a storm blows in, maybe the ground beneath it is saturated, and so the roots are not able to really hold on. Maybe the tree is falling because of disease, but you're not going to be able to control which way the tree falls. It's going to fall where it falls, and that's just the way it is. And we accept it. And so you're walking through the forest and you see some trees that have fallen. Well, that where it fell is where it stayed, and that's okay. We're not upset about that. We're not able to predict where it was going to fall. We're not able to anticipate it's falling, and so there it lies. It assumes a position where it fell. So the point seems to be that there are some actions that have permanent consequences. The tree fell, there it fell, and that's where it's going to stay. It kind of had that lasting event and, a permanent consequence. So it's in our best interest to trust in God, to recognize that there are some natural courses of event, and we're exercising wisdom when we acknowledge that we can't control everything. So point number one then, in each of the next three verses, they kind of have its own point centered around this idea of trust, is we recognize that there are events that have permanent and unpredictable consequences. And so we don't rely upon our own powers or ability, nor do we feel a need to micromanage and control everything. We are happy to resign the fact that we have our limitations and God is in control. And so we just press forward and we allow those natural things to do what they do. The clouds, the storms, the trees in the forest. Our ultimate trust is in God. Then in verse 4, he says, "He who watches the wind will not sow, and he who looks at the clouds will not reap." All right, here he's talking about people that are trying to anticipate everything. This is a different kind of a control and illustrating a lack of trust. So now the guy is studying the weather patterns, and he determines, well, it's just too windy, and so I'm not going to sow, because if I sow, the wind conditions will make it counterproductive, and the wind will carry the seed and bring it to some other locations where I don't want the seed. So I'm not gonna sow at all. Well, there's a problem with that general philosophy that Solomon is going to address, and that is, you may not have a better opportunity. Yeah, it's breezy, And there are going to be some seeds perhaps that are blown to areas where you don't want to plant, but you still got to plant. And as farmers know, that window of planting sometimes is very narrow, especially if, as it seems Solomon is insinuating in the rest of this verse, the storms can move in and heavy rains fall, and then you can't get in the field at all. And so now, first of all, you wish that that seed was already in the ground now that it's getting all this moisture. Second of all that moisture is being wasted, and you can't get out there in the field because it's a muddy mess right now. So trust in God. If you've got opportunity to sow seed today, then sow seed today. Don't let other factors be that which keeps you from doing the work that you know needs to be done. So he says, he who watches the wind will not sow. He who looks at the clouds will not reap. All right, so now the wind has discouraged the guy from working. Now it's the clouds that are discouraging. Boy, it looks like rain. I have no sense getting out in the field today because it'll just be that muddy mess. Well, but how many times have we looked at the clouds and said, looks like rain, and then it never did rain, or it blew over and rained on past us? Well, that happens all the time. And so even those who are meteorologists that they spend their life predicting storms, it still is somewhat of an inexact science, and their predictions are not always accurate. Just like the guy says, well, I had to go shovel 4 inches of partly cloudy today. Well, the weatherman said it was going to be partly cloudy, but it ended up dumping 4 inches of snow. Now, those of you that are in the South are probably thinking, I never had to shovel 4 inches of snow, but up here in Colorado, we get to do that every now and then. And honestly, I kind of like it. So that's a good thing. All right. So the point is that if farmers are waiting for the perfect condition to work, then you're most likely not ever going to get anything done because those perfect conditions may never come around. So here is trust lesson number 2. Even when the conditions may not be ideal, the wise man has a work ethic, and he goes out and he does his best, believing, trusting in God, believing that God will reward you for your hard work. Being overly cautious or continually finding excuses not to work are the traits of a fool. Procrastination is the blight of many in the world today. Always putting off, always saying, I can do it later, or always thinking that there will be a better or more opportune time to do something. Those are the words of a fool. Those are not the words or the attitude of someone that has a good and positive work ethic. Every endeavor that we do has a measure of faith and belief that the timing will still work out. Maybe it doesn't seem like it is the exact right time, but it's still, the time is now. And so I'm going to get to work now. All right. Verse number 3 that has to do with trust, verse 5, actually. Just as you do not know the path of the wind, and how bones are formed in the womb of the pregnant woman, So you do not know the activity of God who makes all things. There are parts of God's wonderful creation that defy explanation. We don't understand all that God does. And Ecclesiastes has encouraged us to accept that fact and live our lives of faith. But faith does not get rid of ignorance. Our trust in God and our faith that God knows what he's doing doesn't ever mean that I'm going to fully understand what he is doing. There may be some things in God's natural world that to us are kind of head scratchers. I don't quite get it. I don't quite understand, but that's okay. That's what trust means is I don't need to understand. I'm just trusting in God. Now, Solomon here is going to offer two illustrations of this particular point that man does not know the activity of God. Illustration number one is the path of the wind. Predicting weather patterns is risky business at best, is an inexact science. And even with all of the modern technology and equipment that we have in order to examine the winds, we still are not able with any degree of certainty to predict where those winds are going to blow. You know, we think about our Tornado Alley in Oklahoma. Well, those winds are going to perhaps stir up a storm, stir up a tornado, and meteorologists will make their best guess on where they think that the most dangerous weather pattern might be. But as we have all learned, if we pay any attention to the prediction of meteorologists, sometimes they get it right. Sometimes they get it wrong. You might be saying, I don't know about you in Colorado, but where I live, more times they get it wrong than they get it right. Well, that sort of confirms what Solomon is saying is that we don't know about the path of the wind. That's the way God created it. And so, yeah, we've made some advances in that area of meteorology, but there's still a lot that we don't know. Now, some versions, you might be looking at your version and saying, I don't even see where Denny's getting wind at all. My version has the word spirit. So if you're looking at the King James version, or you're looking at the English Standard Version, the ESV, you have the word spirit instead of wind. And the Greek word, the Hebrew word ruach, can mean wind or it can mean spirit, just like the Greek word pneuma can either mean spirit or wind. And Jesus in John chapter 3, while he's talking to Nicodemus, is actually doing that kind of play on words with those two words. Can mean spirit, can mean wind. Okay, so if we went with the translation spirit instead of wind, and we combine that with what he is also about to say about the womb of the pregnant woman, it's the idea that there are some things that we cannot explain about the spirit that goes into the womb of the pregnant woman. Now, the word spirit, and we'll come back around to this when we get to chapter 12 and verse 7, is that which God breathed into man, and that breath of life, or that spirit of life. Typically, the word spirit has the idea of a life force. So you can look at a body that is a dead body, and it has all of the parts. It still has the brain, still has the hearts, has the liver and the kidneys and all of the vital organs, but the person's dead. And you can ask a doctor that a few minutes ago on the operating table, the person was alive and now the person is dead. Physiologically, what's different? Well, nothing is different. Literally, physically, everything is still the same, except now there's no more life. The Bible uses the word spirit to describe that life force. And so when Solomon is going to say the spirit goes back to God who gave it, well, it's that life force, because he's talking about the eventual demise of a person. They're getting older, and then their life ends in death. And that life force goes back to God who gave it. So those of you that have ESV or KJV, that your translation is certainly plausible. That he's talking about, the wonder of childbirth and how that spirit goes into the womb of the pregnant woman. Now, if that interpretation is correct, and as I just said, it is certainly plausible, think about the ramifications that has with the idea of abortion. Because abortionists try to maintain that what is in the womb is not really a life. But if spirit represents the life force of God, then that spirit goes into the womb of the mother. John the Baptist, when Mary came to visit Elizabeth, and John the Baptist was still the babe in the womb, he leapt in the womb when Mary came near. Well, that is indicative of life, that the child in the womb is alive, is a child. And the Bible even uses the same word to describe the child in the womb as a child that has now been born. So there's some interesting ramifications there as far as the Bible is concerned. I have in my studies people that have actually used the Bible in order to support abortion, but yet that child in the womb is a person, is a child, and God has provided it that spirit of life. So either way that one might interpret this verse, that doesn't change the point of the verse, and that is that man is uninformed in many areas. We don't understand the wind, and we don't understand how the bones can be formed in the womb, because everything's soft, and all of a sudden the developing child in the womb develops things that are hard, bones. Well, how does that happen exactly? Well, we're becoming a little bit more knowledgeable, and science can offer some explanations to it, but they certainly can't recreate the wonderful process of birth. They can give a scientific explanation of that, but outside of that, and how it really happens is still something that we don't know. All right, he goes on to say, so you do not know the activity of God who makes all things. What God does, how God does it, may be something that defies explanation, just maybe even defies logic. It's not like what God does is illogical, but it's like, that can't happen. How did that happen? So it just seems incredible to us with the great power of God. But he certainly is using the idea of the development of a child in the womb of the woman as an example of the marvelous work of God. And even David in Psalm 139 and verse 14 talks about how I am fearfully and wonderfully made. So true that is. The marvel of the human body is something that, again, how someone can believe that through the evolutionary process just happened is beyond logical explanation to me. As we say, I don't have enough faith to believe, to be an atheist, to believe that things like that could just happen. Design demands a designer, and our bodies are designed. There's no dispute about that. And so that demands that there be a designer. So we don't know how bones are formed. We don't know about the weather patterns and the blowing of the wind. And so everything does not have to be explained logically. We don't have to have an explanation for what's going to happen or what did happen. With faith, we simply accept some things. We recognize that there are many things in life that are unknown. So there is trust lesson number 3, and that we recognize that there are many things in life that are unknown. And as I said before, say, okay, I'm good with that. I can accept that, and that's fine. All right, but it's the activity of God who knows all things. Therein lies the idea of trust. I may not know, but God does. I may not understand, but God does. It may defy explanation to me, but to God, everything has a design and has a purpose. And so, all right, that's why trusting God, having faith in God, relying upon God is the right move. That's what brings peace in our lives. Philippians 4:6. So, verse 6, the key to successful living, work. Now, there's no one that's been through this class from the beginning that's going to go, oh, wow, didn't see that coming. Because Solomon has talked so much about work. So, sow your seed in the morning and do not be idle in the evening, for you do not know whether morning or evening sowing will succeed, or whether both of them alike will be good. So it's morning, you have opportunity, you've got the seed, you've got the time, you've got everything, then sow. Or maybe there are events that happen during the day and now it's nighttime and it's evening. Well, you've got the time, you've got the seed. So do not try to anticipate what might be the best of the best. Now, there are still concepts of trust, and I recognize that. But the point is that you do have to trust that your activities will be fruitful. He uses the word succeed because we have to recognize our own ignorance. Because did you notice that he says, for you do not know whether it's going to be successful morning planning or evening planning. So throughout the book, Solomon has sung the praises of a positive work ethic. And there toward the end, he has moved to work as opposed to procrastination. You've got to work, got to take advantage of opportunity when you can work, because procrastination is, as we said a minute ago, is the operation of the fool. It is not God's plan that we be idle, nor is it God's plan for us to make excuses as to why we cannot work now. Since we don't know the future, since we don't know what twists and turns might happen, what events might happen, the wise say, I'm going to work now and I'm going to give it my best now. He takes advantage of the morning. He takes advantage of the evening. But the point is, he's not idle. He's seizing any and every opportunity he has to work. And Solomon says, and when you evaluate the morning sowing or the evening sowing, maybe both of them ended up being good. That's fine. We must not wait until tomorrow or put off for tomorrow what we can do today. Give our best effort now, work now while we have the strength, while we have the opportunity. You know, one of my favorite phrases that are found in the prophetic books, especially in the book of Jeremiah, is that God got his prophets rising up early and sending. Rising up early and sending, like Jeremiah 25 and verse 3 and verse 4. God wanted his prophets to get on the road and get to work early. When God told Abraham that he wanted him to offer Isaac, well, I don't know that many of us would fault Abraham if he kind of drug his feet on that. I know I need to do that, and maybe I'll get around to doing that later. Have you ever noticed in Genesis 22, Abraham gets up early and he gets with it. It's not a pleasant task, but it is a task that needs to be done. And so Abraham demonstrates that positive disposition by saying, look, I've got a job to do and I may not want to do the job, but I'm going to get up early and I'm going to get the job done. That's what God wants us to do. You know, the worthy woman, the excellent wife of Proverbs chapter 31, she took advantage of opportunity to work even at nighttime. That was apparently the only time that she had in order to accomplish some of the things that she needed to get done. Well, that's why she is a noted example, because she had a good positive work ethic. Verse 7 is our fourth key to successful living, and that is be optimistic. I don't know if you remember the old song with the Jamaican guy, don't worry, be happy. I always think about that whenever I see this verse. Don't worry, be happy. Choose to be optimistic. Solomon says, the light is pleasant and it is good for the eyes to see the sun. Being able to enjoy light, to be able to look at the sun is a gift that only the living possess. And so be optimistic, be the I'm glad to be alive type of attitude, because light ought to provide a pleasant attitude because it affords opportunity. And so it does give you that glad to be alive attitude. Success in life is so often dependent upon one's attitude. And if one has a negative attitude, then that is going to impact productivity. It's going to impact your influence on others, your relationship with others. Whereas most people like the optimistic person, the potential type person. People like those kind of people. Solomon had noted, going back to chapter 9, verses 4 through 6, that we prefer a live dog over a dead lion. It's there are some advantages to being alive because it does provide opportunity. However, if someone is not thankful to be alive, then he's or she is not going to be successful. Life is filled with so many uncertainties that we need to seize the day in order to maximize potential and productivity. One of the phrases that my granddad used to say every now and then is, "You're burning daylight." You ever you ever say that expression maybe to your kids, or have someone say, "You're burning daylight"? Well, that also is a part of what Solomon is getting at here. Is it's pleasant to see the sun, because the sun is the time that you can get work done. In John chapter 9, when Jesus comes upon the man that was blind from birth, and they ask, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? Jesus said it was neither that he nor his parents sinned, but that we must work the works of God who sent me. For we must work while it is still day, because night comes when no man can work. In the idea that, with light comes opportunity to get something done, because there will be night when you're no longer going to be able to work. So light is pleasant. It's good for the eyes to see the sun, because I got daylight, I got work to do, and the sunlight is giving me that life and that time in order to get something done. So the overall idea is be optimistic. Look at life with an optimistic viewpoint or attitude. I think I had, yes, I did. So let's talk a little bit about this, maybe even wrap it up in some points that we could make from this. First of all, live life optimistically. Are you glad to be alive? Do you wake up each morning and thank the Lord for another day? Thank the Lord that you can see the sun? Well, you should have that glad to be alive attitude. When one starts each day with pessimism, then he's only going to see the bad, and it is only going to discourage the day from being productivity. God's has filled our life with wonderful gifts. We need to stop and smell the roses. The pessimism of the negative person doesn't stop to smell the roses, doesn't see the sun, as Solomon would say, fails to find any good in life at all. Secondly, live life opportunistically. Earlier, Solomon noted that death ends all opportunity to accomplish anything, back in chapter 9, verses 4 through 7, and also chapter 9, verse 10. So now is your opportunity. You cannot accomplish anything once the sun is down, once life is over. So we need to seize the moment and do good while we have opportunity. Galatians 6 and verse 10. When your eyes see the sun, it means that another day of opportunity has been given, another day for work, because as Jesus said, the night comes when no man can work. And then third, we should live our life obediently. each new day presents us new opportunity to fix the wrongs, to correct the ills that are in our lives. You know, we think about now's the time to let the people that we love know that we love them. Now's the time to maybe do those good deeds that we've thought about doing. You know, the old adage, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. We don't want our lives to be described with good intentions, but to actually do something. James is making this very point in James chapter 2, verses 14 and following. It's not the person that says, be warmed and filled, that is really the one that pleases God, but the one that actually does what the person needs to help them be warm and to help them have a good meal and be filled. So we need to live our lives obediently. We're not going to have a chance to obey God after we die. Now is our chance. Now is our opportunity. God gives us the gift of life so that we might serve him, Ephesians 2 and verse 10. And he gives us time so that we might repent. 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 9, God is patient toward all, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Well, he had already said that the mockers come and they're mocking, saying, where is the promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all continues just as it was from the beginning. Well, why is it that God has not come yet? Well, the answer, 2 Peter 3 and verse 9, is God is patient, not willing for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. So, yes, we do need to live life optimistically, opportunistically, and obediently. And, the alliteration there is, that's something I don't normally do, but there you go. Okay. So, living a successful life, you share, you trust, you work, you're optimistic, and now don't worry, be happy. Verse 8, indeed, if a man should live many years, let him rejoice in them all. Talk about setting the bar high there, Solomon. I can't even have bad days. Well, no, not according to what he says here. Even if you've lived a long life, and I certainly have, let him rejoice in the years of those of that long life. So many have lived in misery, bemoaning what they should have done or could have done. You know, the old woulda, coulda, shoulda. And that haunts them because they're constantly beating themselves up over what they could have done, should have done. But Solomon says, look, that's in the past. Move on. Don't dwell on what could have done. Solomon considers a long life to be a blessing. However, with that long life, he offers two admonitions. First of all, rejoice in every single day of that long life. This is a direct call, is it not, to being joyous, to being happy, to being optimistic, to having a happy attitude. But is it possible, literally, to rejoice in them all? Certainly Solomon is aware of the trouble that fills men's days. He knows that there are negative things that happen. But there is a possibility, is there not, to find a degree of happiness even in the hard times. You know, someone loses a loved one. And we say, well, how can you be happy when you've buried someone that was such an important part of your life? But can you draw from the happy memories and draw some of that happiness by thinking of those happy memories or funny things that happen? I know that I've preached a lot of funerals and I've attended a lot of funerals, and there are funny stories that people can tell about what the person that is now deceased said or did. Well, even in days that seem to be dark, we can find happiness. His second admonition is to remember the days of darkness. This statement really provides a degree of balance with the earlier admonition. We may strive to live every day with a degree of happiness and a joyous perspective, but the fact of the matter is there are days of darkness, and every life, it seems, will have days of darkness. And Solomon even says, for they shall be many. I would have been okay if he'd have left that part out. But it's there because it's true that there sometimes are going to be many days of darkness. Well, do those days have the power to overcome a positive perspective? Only if you let them. Do those days have the power to bring negativity and discouragement and pessimism? Only if you let them. They don't, in and of themselves, have the power to create in you an attitude. Only you have the power on what you're going to do with your attitude. So, if one doesn't appreciate life and doesn't approach life optimistically, then it's going to be his or her own fault. All right. So let's talk some more about this very interesting statement from Solomon to remember the days of darkness. First of all, we're all going to have them. It is a fact of life. It is an undeniable fact. We can't avoid it, even if we wanted to avoid it. So what should we do with this information? We all are going to have those days. So just acknowledge it. And don't be shocked when those days of darkness come. Maybe we need to take a second and say, what exactly does Solomon mean by days of darkness? Well, he's talking about days where there are some maybe discouraging things that happen. There are some bad things that happen. Someone that you love is injured. Someone that you love is in a car wreck. Maybe even someone that you love dies. And it just drags that cloud, that dark cloud over what was up until then a sunshiny day. But we're all going to have them. And so just Solomon says, remember those days. Second of all, we're all going to have to deal with them. You can't just curl up and wish the dark days away. That doesn't happen that way. So if I know in advance that I'm going to have days of darkness, then I can now prepare myself for the best possible way of dealing with those days of darkness. First of all, I'm not going to be surprised or caught off guard by the days of darkness. Second of all, I've had days to mentally prepare for those days of trouble. And third, I can use those days in order to make me a better, stronger person. I really use them not as a stumbling block, but as a springboard to better days ahead. And then, third, Solomon does say that we should remember those days. This point may be surprising. You might say, man, when I was going through that valley of the shadow of death, I don't want to remember that anymore. I want to wash that memory out of my mind. Solomon says, don't. Don't do that. Don't forget those low points in your life. Rather, we should purposely call those low points to mind. Why? Because it will help us better prepare for future days of trouble. It will, secondly, remind us of how God has delivered us from the valley of the shadow of death, Psalm 23, in days past. As a matter of fact, have you ever noticed how many Psalms of David where it's a lament psalm? He's lamenting the fact that he's in kind of a low point right now. But he remembers how God has delivered him in the past. And so that gives him confidence that God is going to deliver him in the future. And then the third reason why we should remember the days of darkness is they make the present joys more valuable and more enjoyable. As they say, if everything in our life was like a plane, then with no highs and lows, then you really don't appreciate the ups and downs of life. But when you're on a mountaintop, the mountaintop is higher when there was a valley that preceded it. So the lows help give us a better perspective and a greater appreciation of those highs, those mountaintop experiences. Then, as we conclude this chapter, he's got a number of admonitions to the young. And while it is true that he's directing these admonitions to the young, I believe that those of us that are sort of past the days of youth can still learn from this and benefit from this. He says, indeed, verse 9, rejoice, young man, during your childhood. So admonition number one to the young man is to rejoice. Make a conscious effort to be happy. Now notice that he says, rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood. We would say, let kids be kids, and don't put adult burdens and problems and issues on the kids. Let the kids be kids and let them have their moments of being carefree, because we all know that when they become adults, that's when those dark days are going to come. So from childhood, rejoice. Life is too fleeting. Those days of being a young kid, they're here and gone quickly. And then he says, for the days of young manhood, let your heart be pleasant. There are enough negative things that can plague youth. We think about in the history of mankind that a nation goes to war, and so young men are called into military service, and that forfeits any dream of whatever they had for their own life. Or maybe it could be poverty or famine. And so the young man may be called into the labor force far earlier than a young man might be expected. So Solomon is well aware of how fleeting the days of youth are. They are far too precious and too few to waste. And so the young man needs to make a conscious decision first to follow his heart. The word impulses, follow the impulses of your heart, is a Hebrew word that literally means ways, the ways of your heart. And it is not suggesting a careless or thoughtless uh, approach, but to follow one's heart, your mind, your feelings, your emotions, and as your heart directs. All right. So, what is it that the heart of a young man wants to do? And then, third, he says to follow the desires of your eyes. The word desires is really the sights of your eyes. Neither the word impulse or the word desire are negative or sinful in their connotation. So please don't assign sinful things to these words here. That's not what Solomon is saying. These are typical feelings of youth, and Solomon is encouraging him to pursue what interests him, what intrigues him, because once he becomes old, he will no longer have the desire or the energy or maybe the opportunity to do those things. And so here is this really great admonition to youth to go for it. If there are things that you want to do, things that you see that you want to try, places that you want to go, youth is the time to do that. And so go ahead and do it. Now, we know that we're not talking about sinful things because the fourth admonition is make all decisions with God's judgment in mind. He says, last part of verse 9, yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all these things. So you are going to be judged by the decisions. We all know that there are sinful desires of youth. Paul even tells Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2, flee youthful lusts. So there are those sensual lusts, there are those materialistic lusts, maybe there are lusts for fame and power. Flee youthful lust, Paul tells Timothy. But if we take into consideration the admonition that is being given here, here's a young man that is young, and he's got all of these desires and these dreams and these aspirations. Solomon says, go for it. Go for it, because you cannot live your life in retrospect. Now is the time. You don't want to become old and be filled with those, I wish I had done this, I wish I'd gone there. So is it a sinful activity? Then know that God's going to hold you accountable for that. So follow the desires of your heart and the things that your eyes desire to do that are not sinful. And so with me, I think of applications of, I want to travel the world. Well, that's not sinful. I want to go skydiving, or I want to go skiing, or I want to hike the Colorado Trail. Then there's nothing sinful about that. And Solomon is saying, then do it. Do it while you're young. Do it while you have opportunity. Do it while you have less obligations. And so I really do get a lot of mileage out of this when I'm talking to young people, because if it's not sinful, all right. So vexation is internal pain. And then pain is talk about external pain. So internal pain is stuff like sadness, worry, anxiety, anger. Um, Put that stuff out of your life. Those are the things that really mar and negatively impact really enjoying life. So, granted, this is an admonition to young people, but um, can't we all learn from this? There are way too many people that are older that really are vexed. They are just constantly worried and struggling about everything. But worry is a sin, and Jesus commanded us not to worry in Matthew 6 and verse 30. Then he says, put pain away from your body. If you've got an opportunity to rid yourself of pain, do it. It is difficult. Sometimes it is impossible to enjoy life when one is in pain. Think about Job, for example. You think Job was enjoying life with his body racked with pain? Of course not. So, even though there are some religious groups that deny medical treatment for members, supposedly they will be healed by faith, such is not what the inspired Solomon says here. Instead, God intends for man to use whatever is available in order to eliminate pain, as long as it doesn't go against God's law, verse 9. And so, if there's some medicine or some medication or some treatment, then Solomon would say, you're a fool not to do it. Just like he had said earlier, wear white all the time, put oil on your head, use logic and good sense in order to keep yourself comfortable. And then he says, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. Man, you just don't have time to waste. Now is the chance. Now is the opportunity to seize the moment and enjoy being young, enjoy being able to do things that you can. But he does say that childhood and the prime of life, so the Bible does call youth the prime of life, are fleeting. So you move into the prime of life, you leave it very, very quickly. And that's one of the harsh realities, because you are slam dunked into adulthood with all of the obligations and the concerns that go along with being a responsible adult. So you can't do all those things when you're young and free. But while you're young and free, what is it you want to do? Where is it you want to go? Then Solomon would say, you need to do it. Now, there's one last admonition that actually scrolls into chapter 12, which we're not going to get into now. We're going to reserve that for the next class period, which will be our last class period. So chapter 12 will be the conclusion of Ecclesiastes and will be the conclusion of our study as well. So don't miss the last class. Amazing, incredible chapter. Thank you so much for joining me in this study of Ecclesiastes. Appreciate it. God bless. And we'll see you in the next class.